بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. So the last week I promised we're going to discuss the history behind the Mu'tazila movement and the story behind Abu Hassan Ash'ari radiallahu anhu and all of these in his history and everything. So we have this book here. It's an important book to have because it's the only one that's been published with this detail. So this Majmu'a Jawharat al-Tawheed by Dar Tahqiq al-Kitab. They have five different shuruh or four different shuruh on the Jawhara. And one of them, which has not been published yet, is outside of this book, is Irshad al-Murid, the Jawharat al-Tawheed by Abdus-Salam al-Laqani. Abdus-Salam is the son of Ibrahim al-Laqani, who wrote the Jawhara, right? So his son is a sharh, and he has two sharhs. He has this sharh, the Irshad al-Murid, and then he has uh Ithaf al-Murid. And that's the famous one that has all the sub commentaries and glosses on it. But this one's not famous. It's not really studied, but it's really, really nice. It's one of my, if not my favorite commentary on the Johara that I've read over and over again. And this is one that's worth teaching. And it has a lot it keeps it simple, but it adds a lot of detail that you won't find in other normal commentaries. And that's what makes it really unique. So here in the middle of it, there's around 10 or so pages where he kind of just goes through the I highlighted it all because I want to remember. It's important to always highlight your works and then always sticky tab it. And then whenever you sticky tab, you write on the side the entry, right, of what you kept and what you benefited from. That's the way I was taught. Yes, Siri,
Sidi, you mentioned that the Irshad al-Murid is not yet published.
it's not like outside of this work. There's just
Oh, like
there's just
independent.
thoughts. There's just thoughts outside of this.
I see, I see. So
From
this is
what
like
I
the only.
from what I know, yeah, I looked everywhere. I
Right.
couldn't find it. I couldn't find like a PDF of it or even another
Right.
book that's sold of it. I think this is the first time that it was published. Or maybe there's
Okay.
old publication, but it's not good.
All right. Jazakumullah.
So yeah, but if you're gonna do the Johara, it's two volumes and it has some of the major commentaries that are really important. So it has Fath al-Qarib by al-Ujhuri, who's very famous, very important. And then you have Asawi, right? Sharh Asawi, which is a good intermediary kind of Sufi commentary. And then you have Tuhfat al-Murid by Bajuri, which is really important, right? So now he could have probably put instead of Irshad al-Murid, he probably could have put Ithaf al-Murid, but I like that he didn't because Ithaf al-Murid is published everywhere. So it's better to just put something by the same author that hasn't been published before. So this book I'm really impressed by it. So Bismillah ar-Rahman, what he says is that, and I'm gonna just summarize because I can't read the whole thing. It's like 20 pages. He says that Ata Wasil ibn Ata, he was an early Muslim within the first 100 years, and he was a student of um, Al-Hasan al-Basri. Hassan al-Basri. So he came to Hassan al-Basri, the famous tabi'i, right? And um, he says, what's your opinion, right? Of um, people who people who spill the blood of other Muslims and steal their wealth, right? Um, and then they say that all their actions were just according to Allah's qadr, according to His decree. And so this is a group called the Murjiya, right? They basically say that we can do whatever we want, and It's all according to Allah. It doesn't mean anything, right? Problematic. So Wasl, he's with Hassan al-Basri, and someone asks, right? People are doing takfir. They're saying that this person is a kafir for committing a sin, a major sin. So someone who commits a major sin, they say this person's a kafir, right? And other people say that belief is not affected by sins. So you can just, as long as you believe, do whatever you want, right? There's no problem. So what do we believe? So Hassan al-Basri, he leans his head over thinking about this. And Wasil, who is one of his major students, just responds. He says that what I think, he says, I think that the person is not a believer, an absolute believer, and he is also not an absolute disbeliever, right? Right. In this world and the next. And he went up to one of the pillars of the mosque and he began to teach his opinion, right? Kind of and saying it. So he's saying, I believe that there is a state between belief and disbelief, and this is who that person is. So someone who commits a major sin, he's not a believer fully, but he's not a disbeliever fully. There's a state in between. Right? And he began to say this. So there's three states: believer, disbeliever, and state in between. So Hassan al-Basri, what he says is "i'tazala anna Wasil," right? Wasil has excluded, removed himself from us, from Ahl Sunnah, from what we've been teaching. So Wasil then continues teaching, and Hassan Basri basically kind of kicks him out. There's a disagreement whether or not he kicked him out or Wasil just left of his majlis, and he began to garner his own attention, had his own students come, and from there you have people who were called Mu'tazila. Mu'tazila basically mean that they kind of extracted themselves, they excluded themselves from something else, right? They're Mu'tazila, to kind of remove yourself, right, from a situation. So that's where they got the name Mu'tazila, and they called themselves Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed, the people of justice and unity, of oneness, not one unity, of oneness. And the reason why is because they said that, justice, we affirm the justice on Allah, and that, remember, that connects to the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's mandatory that He does what's best for people. That's like the main essential doctrine that they believe in, right? That Allah has to do what's best for people, and that He can't do what's worse for someone, right? So that's the belief that they have, and they also negate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, right? And they say, okay, that goes against Tawheed. If you say Allah has a bunch of attributes, then you're saying there's a bunch of eternal gods. So we negate Allah's attributes. This is incorrect for many reasons, as we've seen. So they say that's proper Tawheed, and what you guys are saying is actually shirk. Right? So they call themselves Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed. Right? And this was in the first 100 years after the Hijrah. Okay, so Wasil ibn Ata, he is the kind of the first person where we start to see the idea of I3tzāl come from, and from him there are a bunch of other, proponents. You have Abu Uthman Amr ibn Ubaid, and you also have Ata ibn as-Sa'ib and Ma'bad al-Juhani, right? And they were kind of the centrals, figures after Wasil. So you have Ata ibn as-Sa'ib, Ma'bad al-Juhani, Abu Uthman, Amr ibn Ubaid, and you can look up all of their biographies. They're important figures, right? And they take all of them they take from Abi Hashim, Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, right? So he's another person, Abi Hashim, who is famous for it. So these kind of main figures and scholars, they kind of become, they take the madhab and they promote it, they build it out, they defend it, and then they have more students. So these are kind of the major ones. Now in Basra, you have Abu Ali Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab ibn Salam and Jubba'i. So you have al-Jubba'i. That's a major important name. And the reason why al-Jubba'i is an important name is because he was the teacher of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, right? He was a teacher of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, and he was considered like the head of the Mu'tazilas in his age, right? So really major. He was a qadi, right? And important figure. He's actually he has major contributions to usul, right? So you actually look like a lot like the major mufassirs, major people, usulis, people who established the usul. are actually Mu'tazilas, right? And they have the like kind of the largest, most important works. And the three, I believe the three most important usul works I have to review this, but that we actually take from were by Mu'tazilas, right? So we don't reject everything that they say just because they're Mu'tazilas. That's not, we've never done that, but we reject and we take what is good and we, I don't know, avoid what was mistaken, right? Okay, so Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, right? What is his real name? His name is Ali ibn Ismail ibn Ishaq ibn Salim ibn Ismail ibn Abdullah ibn Bilal ibn Abi Burda or Harith or Amir ibn Abi Musa Abdullah ibn Qais al-Ash'ari. So who is Abi Musa al-Ash'ari? The famous companion of the Prophet ﷺ. So he is connected to Abi Musa al-Ash'ari, right? The famous Sahabi. And this is a famous, Ash'ar is a famous tribe in Yemen. And there's different reasons where they got Ash'ar from. Some say that it was a type of um, it was a name of a person, right? Of that tribe. Other people say that it had to do with like the hair on their body, because ashad comes from hair. Allahu alam. These are just like linguistic potentialities. So in Tabaqat al-Shafi'i al-Kubra, we have a discussion about Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari. Right? And he is born, when is he born? He's born 260 after Hijrah. And he dies 330. 330. Right? So he lives around 70 years. Around 70 years. So he studied with Jubba'i in the Mu'tazila school for over 40 years of his life, until he was 40. And he began to see in his dreams the Prophet ﷺ. And he saw him 3 times. And every time that he saw the Prophet said, انصر العقائد المروية عني فإنها الحق, right? Establish or promote and save the aqidah that is narrated from me. So the aqidah that is found in the texts, i.e. the textual aqidah, which is really interesting. You see like that he didn't say like the aqidah that you establish with your mind. The reason why is because we can find in the Sharia, right? And for these people who are already Muslim, the true aqidah. So what's the way of sifting out one's aqidah is seeing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established, right? So if something is clearly going against the Quran and Sunnah, then it's wrong. And that's why, right, that is kind of another, yardstick for us, or like a measure, is to see how our logical conclusions, they weigh against what we have established as truth from the Sharia, right? So that's really, really important. A lot of people, they mistake the idea of hukm aqli, that like you come to something through your mind alone, to say that now that you're no longer looking at the Sharia when you're looking into aqidah. That's incorrect, right? We're using our mind to come to the foundational truths about the existence of Allah, about the Prophet ﷺ, and his genuine messengerhood. And once we get there, we now consider and take into full account everything that comes from the Sharia. This is the difference between the mutakallimun, the people the Muslim theologians and philosophers from the Muslims, and the philosophers, the pure Aristotelian, Avicennan philosophers. The reason and the difference is that the philosophy, Neoplatonic philosophy, its goal is to understand the truth of reality without any reliance on scripture at all, right? Just using the mind. So we don't do that, right? That's a key difference between us and the philosophers. So he sees the Prophet in a dream, and the Prophet says this to him 3 times. And all 3 of those times he kind of excused himself by saying, كيف أدعو مذهبا تصورت مسائله وعرفت دلائله منذ 30 سنة من الاشتغال بالعلم. How could I leave a madhab that I have understood and conceptualized its doctrines, and I knew all of its proofs? So I've proven this to be true, right, for over 30 years, right, from the beginning of my engagement with knowledge. So he's saying, how can I go get something that I have, built my career of knowledge off of, right? So Prophet, he says that low, the Prophet responds and he says, "Lawla anni a'lamu anna Allah yamudduka bi madadin min indi lamma amantu bih." The Prophet, he says, if I did not know that Allah will like sustain you in this, right, from him. So sustain you in this new pursuit of truth, of returning to the text, returning to that which is narrated from the Prophet, I wouldn't have commanded you to do this, right? If I didn't know that, I would have commanded you. So he woke up and he said, فَمَاذَا بَعْدَ الْحَقِّ إِلَّا الضَّلَالِ, right? So what could be after truth? This is an ayat, except falsehood. So um, if this isn't truth, then whatever else that's out there should be falsehood. So let me look into this. Let me reassess. And this is a key point, that as mutakallimun, as people learning aqidah, we should never fall into taqleed ever, which means that we're just blindly following someone and we're just accepting their conclusions and not using our mind, not using our intellect, right, to understand things. We have to always be able to revise and change our opinions and our conclusions. Always be willing to change the conclusions you came to if better new evidence comes. And that's why Aqidah, it's not fluid because truth is one, but it is something which is determined and found by the knower. It's not something which is just written in stone, and just because someone else said this, you have to believe it, right? You have to come to those conclusions yourself. And if you come to conclusions that are opposite than that, then then either you're wrong and you're mistaken, and you can be fixed, or your original conclusions were wrong, right? And then you change those. So he says, and he began to look at all of the hadith that were narrated in regarding to the shafa'a, intercession, seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Mu'tazila said that you will not see Allah. So he's like, he goes back to all the hadith that talk about witnessing Allah, right? And other those. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gave him that sustenance. He gave him that tawfiq. وكان يفتح عليه من المباحث والبراهين ما لم يسمعه من شيخ قط. And he would begin to see and learn. He had openings basically into different ideas and things that he had never heard from his teacher before, right? And he had never learned from someone who rejected him, and he never saw it in a book. So he begins to have these openings into understanding, and as we know, wisdom and knowledge is from Allah. So he starts to have these understandings that he had never seen before. So he removed himself from the people and stayed in his house for 15 days. And then after that, he came to the mosque and he climbed the minbar and he said, "Oh people, oh congregants, I have only secluded myself from you this amount of time because I have looked and parsed all of the proofs, and nothing has basically agreed with me. And nothing basically agreed with me. So I couldn't decide. فَاسْتَهْدَيْتُ اللَّهِ. So I asked Allah for guidance, and He guided me to the belief that He has placed, that I have placed in my book. And he was holding up a book. And I have removed and taken myself from everything that I used to believe. Right? Just as I can remove my thobe right now. So he takes his thobe off and he takes his thobe off. Right? So he has his book. He said, I've placed all my proper aqidah in here, and I have stripped myself from the aqidah of my teacher, my previous teachers, just as I have done with my thobe, and he takes his thobe off. Right? And he gives his book that he now had written to the people. So he was the first person, right? Essentially, the first person, right, which is arguable, right? Because others say that there were earlier books of Tawheed, right? But he was the first one to write a book of the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and what it included in terms of the unanimous consensus of the Sahabas and the opinions of the Salaf. So he was the mujaddid, right, the reviver of this ummah of for the third century, right? So because remember, he's born 260, so he catches the third century, so he's the reviver of the deen, right, of the century. And what's interesting, right, he's 260 at 40 years old, right? He has these epiphanies, right? So literally on the head of the 300, right, the beginning of 300, he now revives this belief, right? He revives this true aqidah. So he's a mujaddid. Um, yes, Dave.
So the book that you mentioned he announced to the people, what is that one called?
So he doesn't, it doesn't have a name. It's just um he just wrote his opinions in a like a little manual that he wrote, like a little document. I don't think
Okay,
it's actually a full book that he wrote. So he has his later books that come like al-Ibana and all
yes,
the other
yes.
books, but this wasn't that.
Okay, makes sense.
And there's a famous hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he raises on the head, at the beginning of at every 100 years, someone who will, right, establish and also revive this ummah, right, and the matter of his religion, and that could be in all of the sciences. So it doesn't mean it could be universal, like he's just reviving the Muslims in general, the strength and the connection to Islam, but it can also mean reviving a certain field in Islam, right? So whether that's aqidah, whether that's fiqh, hadith, there's like mujaddids for all of those sciences. وكانت المعتزلة قد رفعوا رؤوسهم. So the Mu'tazilas had kind of gained popularity before this date, and they were famous. So when they finally saw the way that Ash'ari had brought the proofs, right, it really took them out of the spotlight. And this is where Ahl Sunnah kind of really becomes prominent in their understanding. So this is why Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari is like the head of the Sunni creed. Not because he started it, right? Obviously, he's getting it from the predecessors, from the Salaf, from Abu Hanifa, and all these people who wrote in Kalam and wrote in these books and did the early work. But he is crucial because in a time of strength and popularity for the Mu'tazilas, he comes from that school and then refutes it and reestablishes a major movement and school of thought that is aligned with the Quran and Sunnah. Okay. So one day, right after he has left the Mu'tazilas, he has a debate with his teacher Al-Jubba'i. And he comes to him and he says, "What do you say for three brothers? One of them died, old in age, and he believed. And he believed and he was obedient. And the second one died, and he was old, and he was a sinner. And the third died, and he was a child. He hadn't reached puberty. So, what do you say of these three people? Remember the early opinion of Waslim and Alta regarding the sins and belief and disbelief. And in connection to that, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to do what's best for someone, right? So remember those 2 points. So Jabari, he says that as for the believer and the obedient one, he's in Jannah. And as for the sinner, he's in hellfire. So the one who sinned, he was Muslim, but he sinned, he's in hellfire. Right? Um, and remember, this is returning to the another principle, like the justice principle, that anyone who commits who's obedient, Allah has to reward them. And anyone who is a sinner, Allah has to punish them. It's wajib. Right? And he says, and as for the small child, he's in paradise. So Ash'ari, he says, um, if this small child is in paradise, he aligns, like he is equal to his older brother who is obedient in rank. Right? They both catch paradise. But then Jubai says no, because the one who was obedient, he did works and he increased in rank. So Ash'ari, he says, so the small child will then say, "Oh Allah, the best thing for me would have been to leave me, right? To let me live so that I could become of age and do good works. And I could reach the same level as my brother." And Jubai, he says, Allah will say, "Alimtu annaka." I knew that if you were to grow old, you would disbelieve and enter into paradise. So the best for you would be to stay a young child, right? So he has to return to his principles. So how is Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, how is he refuting him? He's taking his own principles. He's going along with it to disprove him. This is the way of disproving. So you can, there's many different ways to debate someone. You can either just immediately reject them with your own counterproofs, or you can assume what they say to be true, and then based off of those assumptions, you reach absurdity. And then it shows that those assumptions were that those conclusions were wrong, obviously. So if that's true, then Abu al-Ash'ari al-Ash'ari he says, so the sinner will then say, "Oh Allah, the best thing for me would be to kill me to make me die as a child, and then that way I wouldn't enter into hellfire." Right? And actually, all of the people of fire would not say that. So then, what will Allah say? So Jubai responds to Ash'ari after he had, you know, beat him with his proof and showed that his madhab doesn't make any sense. Abika Junun, are you crazy? Basically saying so. Now he responds with an ad hominem attack. Right? So that's a way of knowing that you won, right? If they respond with ad hominem attacks. So Al-Ash'ari he says no, but rather وقف حمار الشيخ في العقبة. Right? And this is like a famous now quote that's mentioned, right? That the donkey of the sheikh has stopped on the hill. So like when you're walking with the donkey follows you. So you go up the hill and you go down the hill, and the donkey's follows the sheikh, the old man, the person leading it. But he says that no, rather, right? You kept going, you went down the hill, and I didn't follow, right? So I'm not crazy, but I'm just not following you anymore. And now this is a famous kind of a anecdote. So Ash'ari, right? He disproves Jubai. This kind of debate becomes famous. It goes everywhere. And this was actually a major reason, like this is how debate was, right? It wasn't heated. It wasn't. It was truly trying to seek the truth. And from these debates came the strength and actually like reviving the ummah. And so debate is crucial to our deen. It's something which is encouraged in the Quran, and the Prophet himself did it, but in the prophetic manner, right? Not in the way that we see a lot of Muslims doing it these days, right? Which is very unfortunate. So these debates would then be written down, they'd be preserved, they'd be well known and established in land, and then that would allow people to always return. So they just return to this story to kind of show them where they're at and why they're not following the I3tzāl, right? So it can become like the general accepted widespread proof for the madhab, right? Is the fact that this person beat this other person, right? But now all debates are just all ad hominem. They're all just trying to win over, with tactics and tricks. They're not actually trying to seek truth at all. So Ash'ari, Imam al-Ash'ari, he establishes and he revives the group of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and him and his followers begin to refute the Mu'tazilas and establish what the Quran has and the Prophet has taught, and they were called with Ash'a'ira, right, or Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and they were in the lands of Khurasan, Iraq, Sham, and majority of the lands. So majority of the places, right, were Ash'ari. And the reason why is because Basra and Iraq and these places, Sham, were very central to the Muslim land, right? And Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari was from Basra, right? Or no, he was from Yemen, but he was in Basra when he was and his teacher was from where his main teacher, right? And the central of all of like the Muslim thought was surrounding around I3tzāl, right? Al-Jubai. So he refutes the main guy, and then that's where he kind of gains popularity. As for, right, transoxania, right, beyond ma wara in nahar, that's that famous saying, right? So behind or after the Oxus River, right? And this this includes like Uzbekistan and Samarkand, and I think that's in Uzbekistan, and all of those surrounding areas, all of those surrounding areas. Um, so it includes like Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Central Asia, Turkey eventually, right? All in these places, right? So that whole land, beyond the Oxus, right, is not Ash'ari, right? And they take from Abu Mansur Muhammad ibn Mahmud al-Maturidi al-Hanafi, right? Who is a teacher, the student of Abi Rida al-Ayadi, who was a student of Abi Bakr al-Juzjani, who was the student of the Arif Billah Abi Sulaiman al-Juzjani, who was a student of Imam Abi Abdullah Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, right? So you have one, two, three people in between Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, right? The great Mujtahid Imam and the Sahib of the madhab of Abu Hanifa, right? He really is like the quintessential figure of the madhab, right? And through him comes all the madhab, right? So, um, so three people between Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani and al-Maturidi, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, right? So, very close, right, to um, the early Hanafi school. And this is why you can see why, right, these lands in connection and in proximity to the Hanafi school, right, they maintained a connection between the Hanafi madhab and the Maturidi creed, right? So it was just the Maturidi creed is merely just an extension of what Imam Abu Hanifa taught through his students that reached these lands. Yeah. So these two schools, right, began to kind of flourish in the 3rd century after the Hijrah, right? And both of them are true. Both of them are according to the Haqq. And if anyone follows the conclusions of these two imams, then they have actually they've reached the truth. Like they're saved according to the majority of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now, according to the disagreements between the two madhabs, right, they say that all of them can be included in seven main differences between the madhabs. Because remember, they came to conclusions differently at the same time, individually. They didn't rely on each other. The Maturidi school and the Ash'ari school, so they're not dependent on each other at all. So, and none of these disagreements are from the central issues of Aqidah, the issues that really, really matter and can change kind of your outlook on the entire deen. But rather, they're on the extra issues, the furu', not the usul, and these issues that are already mujtahid, like there's khilaf in them, and they're masail ijtihadiyah. They are already um, uh, deterministic or probabilistic and possible for investigation and disagreement. So what are these four? These seven, which we wanted to discover. The first is istitna'u fil iman, qala bihi al-Ash'ari. So saying istitna in belief. So saying inshallah in belief. So one says, they say, can you say? So you'll see how like on the how like not outlandish, but how uncentral this issue is. So what did he say? He says, if Imam Ash'ari, he says that you can say ana mu'minun inshallah. I am a believer if inshallah, if Allah wills. Right? Maturidi say you can't say that. You can't say that because that means that you're not a believer right now. They have their own disagreement. But that's very ijtihadi, and it really is kind of lovely. It really is just kind of a linguistic disagreement. There's not really a disagreement, as we'll see. The second is السعيد لا يشقى والشقي لا يسعد قال بها الأشعري, right? That the person who is Sa'id, who has been written as happy, as he will go to hell, like he's been written as the one who will be in paradise, right? The Sa'id, he will never go into hellfire, right? And the Shaqi, the one who is just like was written to be destroyed and will never be saved. Imam Ash'ari says this. And the Maturidi say no. It's possible otherwise. Right? It's possible that the Sa'id could actually end up being Shaqi. And there's a difference. So these are just like ijtihadi in relation to, these extra issues that are found in the Quran and Sunnah that connected to creed, but not central. Like, what's a central belief? I believe in Allah, Allah's attributes. These things that are really, really, really connected to just belief in Allah and the messengers. These are things which are extra. Okay. The third is al-kasb alladhi yuthbitu al-ash'ari. So kasb, acquiring actions. This is an entire theory of how we are responsible for our actions and how we actually are ascribed our actions. Like, how do we have free will and how do we gain our actions? The Ash'aris, they have a concept called kasb, right? Kasb, acquiring your actions. Maturidis say, no, we don't need that, right? We don't need acquiring kasb, right? Because they'll give their own conclusions to this. So we don't actually need uh, we don't need kasb at all. And the fourth is ma'rifatullahi wajibatun bil-shar'. So um, the Ash'aris, they say that knowing Allah is only known to be obligatory through the Sharia, through the book. So we only know that we have to know Allah through the book. So how does it work? Is we come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then through knowing Allah and that he exists, that the Prophet is on the true messenger, and he brought the message, then that message tells us, look, you have to believe in Allah. It's obligatory on you to believe in Allah and tell others that everyone else has to believe in Allah. Now, once they do this, and it really comes from the Prophet, so the Prophet is telling us that we have to believe in Allah, right? We have to worship. Then we say that we have to. But the mind, if one was just sitting alone in a castle and they never met the Prophet, they never met anyone, and they never heard the Sharia at all, right? Then it would not be obligatory upon them to know Allah. They could know Allah, that's great, but that's not obligatory upon them. The Maturidis say, no, 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 it is. Allah's given you the potentiality to know Allah. He's given you the fitrah, and He has guided your mind, the sound, rational mind. So it is obligatory just by thinking without revelation to know Allah, right? So that's a disagreement that they have. The fifth is أن أوصاف الأفعال الرازقية حادثة عند الأشري وبقدر منها الماتريدي. That the attributes that are actions, the active attributes, the attributes of action, so like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation and sustenance, these attributes that are the actions of Allah, Imam Ash'ari, he says that they're actually incipient, they're created. They're created, they're not eternal, right? They exist in time. And he has his proofs for this. It doesn't actually lead to any absurdity. Maturidi say no, all of the attributes of Allah, whether they're attributes of affirmative attributes or attributes of actions, they're all eternal. The sixth disagreement, Ash'ari, he says that بِجَوَاءِ الصَّغَائِرِ عَلَى الْأَنْبِيَاءِ عَلَيْهِمُ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ. Imam Ash'ari, he says that small minor sins prophets can do. Prophets can do minor sins, and the Maturidiyya say no, they can't. Remember, we don't do taqleed. So we're never just gonna say, oh, Ash'ari says this, I say it, right? And we can do that for ijtihad, for these ijtihadi issues, fine. With the usul, we can't. We have to come to conclusions ourselves. But the goal is that we actually can get to a state where we can understand which one actually makes the most sense based off of the proofs, right, of these issues themselves. And the seventh is Ash'ari, he says, لَيْسَ عَلَى الْكَافِرِ نِعْمَةٌ, that there is no ni'mah, no like a reward for or blessing for a disbeliever at all. They don't have any blessings, right? Disbelievers. Maturidi say yes, they do. And this is just small disagreement. So the final thing that this chapter talks about, he says that, okay, well, why is it then that the Sahaba never said, and we talked about this a bit, why did they never have, need, Ash'ari, Maturidi? Why did they not call themselves these things? Why did they not build out this Aqidah? Why did, they never did this, so why do we need it? It says that the Sahaba, they didn't have these type of major disagreements in their i'tiqad, in their belief. Rather, they were on one specific path that they got from the Prophet. And the only disagreements that they would have were ijtihadiyah that were related to fiqh, right? Those were the major, right? And then whenever they would have these disagreements, they'd return to the Prophet or return to the Quran and Sunnah. But after this first generation, right, people begin to have diseases of the heart, begin to argue and debate. They begin to have lots of sins, and the sins clouds their hearts and covers up their intellect. And Ibn Umar, it was said to him, قَدْ ظَهَرَ فِي زَمَانِنَا, it has appeared in our time, people who commit zina, they steal, they drink alcohol, they kill other people that Allah has forbidden. And then they all gather and they try to prove each other wrong, saying this was according to Allah's knowledge. Right? So they do all of these horrible things and they say, oh well, Allah knew this was gonna happen, so I'm fine. Right? So and they'll debate about Allah's attributes and stuff like that. So Ibn Umar, he got angry and he said, Subhanallah, right? That was in Allah's knowledge, right? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ يَحْمِلُهُمْ عِلْمُهُ عَنِ الْمَعَاصِي. Yes, it was in Allah's knowledge, but His knowledge didn't push them to commit those sins, basically, right? So, not only does your proof not make sense, but it's just extremely ignorant, right? According to and how the Sharia works. So he's saying that, you clearly, you know that you did these actions, and you will be responsible based off of the Quran and Sunnah, and the knowledge that Allah had of your sins didn't push you to do those sins, right? So, this is not a formal proof, but what he's saying is that just look at the ignorance of these people that are coming out, right? That all of these kind of like tricky, trying to get around, beating around the bush, trying to get out of their sin, and these disagreements, these misconceptions about revelation and key points that were unanimous and understood by the Sahaba, they start to come out. And when they start to build out, now you have these madhabs like we mentioned. So you have Hassan al-Basri who's teaching major tabi'i, right? It's all fine. And then from his own circle, right, comes someone who says something which is against the Quran. So no, says something which is incorrect. So even, so from these circles, the people are being, they're kind of going astray. They're building the strength, and now you have this entire madhab called Mu'tazila. And from that, now you need a response. And the response is Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. Right? And those are the two responses that Allah sent. Right? So he says that it may be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided, decreed that they exist in this time of bid'ah, right? And ahwa, and just like whims, right? To push away these innovations and to strengthen and renew the faith, which is true, right? This is why we have the aqeedah that we have, is because these imams, they re-establish it and they pushed back, right, against these proofs. So that intention to do tajdeed and to protect the deen and the pristine sunnah that we find and the aqidah that we find in the Quran and Sunnah, that's something that every one of us, we have to have the intention to do and to bring it and to protect the deen from it, right? From all of its detractors, whether they're atheists, naturalists, wherever they come from, right? To establish his deen and to revive the religion. So, alhamdulillah, that was a chapter on from the book on the story of Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and the history and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi and whatnot. And then there's a lot more details in their biographies if you want to look in those. Any questions? So yeah, and there's good books, in Arabic to read along with these works that we're doing, and English too. There are some good works as well, which I can try to get you guys the PDFs of. I'm just trying to think, looking at what I have here. But inshallah, the goal is, it's important to know the history of these things, and to know like the background behind all of these events. And the more that you read them, the more that it'll be solidified. and to show us where our tradition comes from, right? And how it came about, and why these imams did what they did, right? And it's important, especially nowadays, because you'll have like that question that he answers, which is this is hundreds of years ago that he responds. That question comes up a lot, right? Why do we need Ash'ari? Why do we need Maturidi? I should just take the Prophet. Why don't I just follow the Prophet? Right? I'm not, I follow the Prophet. I don't follow Ash'ari, right? And these things. So these are kind of like the arguments that you'll hear nowadays, and you have to know how to respond. And he explains that very well. Inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Muhammad wa alihi wasallam. Inshallah, next week we'll continue with our Dua Ma'ali. I want to try to, I'm not going to pick it up. We're going to keep it at our good pace, but inshallah we can, we're slowly working our way through it. And then I want to, like I said, we want to finish by the summer, inshallah. So we have around a month and a half left to finish, inshallah. I think we can do it. Inshallah. Okay. I'll end here, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم